and good evening. It's fantastic to see you all here for this Writers Mosaic Malcolm X by any means necessary event, which is going to be fantastic because all Writers Mosaic events are. My name is Polly Russell. I'm head of the Eccles Institute at the British Library. The Eccles Institute looks after collections, research, and engagement about the Americas. So if you are interested in any aspect of the Americas, good or bad, we're interested to hear from you. We run all sorts of events programs. We sponsor fellowships, support writers, creatives, academics, students. So it's Eccles Institute. Look us up. We would love to hear from you. And one of the things we do is that we partner with organizations that we recognize are doing wonderful work. And that is for us, Writers Mosaic, who we're so proud to be collaborating with on a series of events. Writers Mosaic are incredibly creative. They champion the very best in writing, in political and public conversations about some of the key issues and key people and themes of our time. We are so thrilled that they're here tonight and that we've also got a program in July around Frantz Fanon. So please do, The Writers Mosaic team are wonderful, all of them. And I'm going to introduce the director of Writers Mosaic, Colin Grant, who, with his amazing team, makes it all happen. Over to you, Colin.
Well, thanks, Polly. I don't really need to do much now that you've done that fantastic introduction. But I do like to remind people about how Johnny Cash would begin an evening. You know Johnny Cash? Johnny Cash would walk to the front of the stage and he'd say, "I'm Johnny Cash," and the crowd would go wild. Hold on to that thought. I'm Colin Grant. Great. I'm not alone. I'm going to welcome to the stage our wonderful panelists and musicians. We're going to have Bonnie Greer. Gary Younge. Vanessa Kisuule. And we have a wonderful musician, Fale Inyoki. So we're going to have a discussion about the relevance of Malcolm X, but also we're going to have Fale going to play some songs. And he's also agreed to play some percussion underneath some of the readings, actually.
Fabulous, great.
But we're going to kick off with a song from Fale. Just so you know, there's going to be, hello Ross, there's going to be a whole evening here where there's no interruption, there's no going to the bar. We're just going to hang for an hour and a half or so, and then we can go to the bar. But before we begin, Fale, you may have noticed some little cards as you sat down. There's the cards, the business cards of our organisation. And I was going to ask you to do something simple with them, but I'm going to ask you to do something a little more complicated than that, which I had in mind, and to remind yourself of why you're here. Because you could be at home, munching on your crisps, slobbing out on your sofa, but you're here because there's a kind of community of people here who want to have a participatory event and a live event. And I always like to encourage the idea that you're not here on your own. So I'd like each of you to turn to your neighbour and say, "Peace be with you."
Peace be with you.
Peace be with you.
Peace be with you.
Peace be with you. Show me that.
Vibes. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So we're going to hear about Malcolm X's life and his importance, but we're going to start off with Fale. And just Fale, just briefly, what does Malcolm X mean to you? Why are you here?
I'm here just by the will of the Most High. That's why I'm here. And then Malcolm X means somebody big. to me. I really don't know him deeply, but I know how many times he's been fighting for mankind since in Africa.
Thank you. Yeah.
Blessed.
So we're going to hear some.
Keleke farafinu Woka keleke muholuye Nebi fula Eka keleke farafinu Malcolm X Ika keleke farafinu ye Malcolm X Ala eja faima Ala eja faima Ala eja faima Ala eja faima Ika keleke minye Ala eja faima
Thanks, Fale. So, as Polly was saying, we're WritersMosaic. We're a division of the Royal Literary Fund, which has been in existence since 1790, primarily to support writers, both with artistic practice, but also to give them money for writing. And so for this guest, it's very helpful, isn't it?
Yes.
For this night, we've asked some of the writers to write essays, which will be featured on our website in May. And alongside that, it's going to be in a print edition in the bookseller in May, which will commemorate Malcolm X, who was born in May 1924. Shall we just start by asking each of these writers, who you will know, I'm sure you know Bonnie Greer's been writing many, many plays and books over the years. She's got a memoir in progress. Is that right, Bonnie?
Yes, a real one.
A real one. I've been blessed to be on the stage with Gary over the years. I was on the stage with you a couple of years ago, wasn't I, Gary, talking about your latest book, which is Dispatches from the Diaspora. And Vanessa Kisuule, I've been on the stage with Vanessa four times now. We just can't get enough of Vanessa. And her new book is called Neverland. And Vanessa's a poet. You may know Vanessa from the amazing poem she did to commemorate the toppling of Colson's statue in Bristol a few years ago. Let's begin by asking, just starting with you, Bonnie, what was your first encounter with either the idea or the writing or the thinking of Malcolm X? We're going to ask each of you that question.
Well, I was born and brought up on the south side of Chicago. And I'm old enough to say that I remember Malcolm used to come on a talk show, which I'm going to write about. And he was on the south side of Chicago. So the Nation of Islam, and Malcolm was very much a part of my youth. And he would come on this talk show like once a month and just really tell people what was happening. So it was interesting, as I will say, to watch Malcolm's arc because I was quite young, not quite young, I was 14 when he came on the scene, and watched how he changed the whole idea of what blackness was, because before Malcolm, we didn't call ourselves black. And then after Malcolm, we got this idea.
What did you call yourself?
We were colored people, Negroes. I mean, I didn't do that, but my parents would, because that was the civil rights movement. Black was a term that you hurled at somebody to insult them, okay? So for somebody to come out and say they were black shows a change in attitude, but also because Malcolm was so beautiful, he was so dapper, that becoming a person of African descent in America became corporal as well, of the body. We may have gone too far with that now. It moved away from, no, I mean seriously, it moved away from sort of the intellectual, internal, spiritual, to how did you look, you know? And so my hair, as I was saying, my hair's been like this most of my life. I cut all of the straightening out of my hair and everything to incorporate this idea. So black is beautiful, and Malcolm he didn't invent it, but because he was beautiful, because he did present himself gorgeously all the time, that my generation began to think, we're not gonna wear overalls and march in the streets anymore. We're gonna start being elegant.
And it was Marcus Garvey who said, don't take the kinks out of your hair, but take the kinks out of your brain.
Yeah, take it out of your brain. But then we decided that to have straight hair was actually to conform to what white people thought we should be in order for us to come into the tent to negotiate. So we changed that. But in some instances, we went too far, as young people do.
Thank you. So Gary, and by the way, this lovely slideshow of images relating to Malcolm X and his organization, the Nation of Islam, and Harlem, especially where he's focused on. What about you, Gary? What's your introduction to Malcolm X?
I would have been at university. If you remember, I would have known about him before then. I grew up in Stevenage. There's not a whole lot of segues into Malcolm X from Stevenage. So you have to find a way. And I liked the idea of him before I knew really that much about him. And what I'm just going to be honest here was that white people like Martin Luther King so much, I assume there must be something wrong with him. and the kind of, love thy neighbor and all that. And so to see that there was historic, I mean, it's meaningful to say that at this time, I'd never heard of Claudia Jones. I'd never heard of black British figures. So all of this was coming from America, which is already kind of a little bit, completely out. But there are not many Stevenages in America, And, but here was a guy, there's a picture of him with a gun, and underneath in the poster says, by any means necessary. And I'm 21-year-old male, and I'm thinking I want a piece of that. Of one of the challenges, I think, growing up in a black minority anywhere in the West is how to carry yourself not in the event of indignity, but in the certainty of indignity. How do you hold yourself, and how do you stay sane? And here was, I wasn't going to walk around with a gun, obviously, but here was an element that, sometimes it's like, no, I'm not going to do that. And actually, I don't care that you don't like that. And I was never a pacifist either. So hit me and I'll hit you back. So all of that was, in some ways, the introduction for me was somewhat performative. It was about how to perform my black male self in a world where I would most certainly be disrespected.
Absolutely.
The more cerebral stuff came later.
So he was a man of great transformation. Did he transform anything in your thinking, Vanessa?
Is this on? I'm so glad you said that, because I think there's a a retrospective way, we like to think about how we're introduced to these pivotal figures where we say, well, you know, I remember staying up all night with the flashlight, you know, earnestly reading the autobiography. And I think often when you're young, you are taken in by the iconography first.
Yeah.
That sense of a strident, unapologetic person who is wearing themselves, which is a hard thing to do, as you said, Gary, as a Black minority. And I also talk in my essay about the fact that I actually have a huge grievance with how Black history, as it was taught in this country, was always about the African-American lineage and not about the incredibly rich story we have here as Black British people. But at the time as it stood, you know, I was being introduced to, you know, the Rosa Parks, the Martin Luther Kings, the Malcolm X's as figures. And, you know, I was a bit scared of Malcolm X. I remember reading the autobiography when I was maybe 13, 14, and being like, yo, this is crazy. You know, white devil. I was going to a majority white private school. I was like, all of them? Devils? Okay. You know, having to really recalibrate my brain to that notion. But Poppy's my friend. So, you know, I think I liked the rhetorical thrust of that. I liked the strength of it, but the actual application, I didn't really know how that was going to work. What I really admired was reading about his early life as an autodidact in prison, because I was always reading and, you know, always wanting to improve my vocabulary. And there's an anecdote he shares in the book where he read the dictionary from beginning to end. And I was like, that's so cool. And he attributes that to one of many reasons he had the extensive vocabulary he did. And I was like, I too am going to read the dictionary from beginning to end. I got to about like E, and I was like, I want to go hang out with Poppy. I'm bored. But no, I think there was something very instrumental to me reading that and realizing that education has something to do with schools, but not everything to do with schools, and is so much more about your desire to go out and learn for yourself, to seek out the information that is going to uplift and buttress your life, especially when you're talking about being a Black person in a Western world. You're not going to be handed the education, the history, the context that puts your life into the full and three-dimensional aspect that you need to be able to stand on your 2 feet. So Malcolm X's autobiography definitely taught me that. And then, as you say, later on, I was able to absorb some of the socio-political heft of what he was saying, but not quite at that juncture.
Thank you, Vanessa. So, Bonnie, would you read from your essay, which is going to be on WritersMosaic in the near future? And I think Fale is going to improvise and accompany.
Oh, that's fabulous.
Reading, if that's okay.
That's wonderful. I really like that. Bear with me, because I'm going to stumble through this a tiny bit because I cut it down because you asked me to. It's all right. Malcolm X, for me, became and remains a deeply intellectual man, driven to activism and witnessing. But speculation and assumptions and attributions assigned to him, especially by those who did not see and know him in his life, is always interesting to me. I read them with respect. When I was a young girl, in my early, I grew up on the south side of Chicago. And when I was a young teenager, Malcolm made irregular appearances on a late night chat show. The host was a man named Irv Kupcinet, who wrote a major showbiz column and knew everybody in Chicago. Malcolm would come on set with a notebook full of research, dressed in a very serious and rather chic suit and glasses. He was incredibly elegant and what my community would call clean. He would always fight back with the words of the American Constitution itself, leaving his opponents totally stunned. He was no saint, not by any definition of the word, nor was he a prophet, not to me. To me, he had enormous courage, a great heart, and he was a seeker. Now, for Malcolm was never enough. He did not live long enough to become the has-been that my fellow black baby boomers had rendered James Baldwin. We did not have enough time to cancel Malcolm like we did Martin Luther King before his assassination. An early, untimely death can be a kind of luck. Malcolm X was an artist in the creation of a deeper reality, not only for us black people, but for all human beings. His pilgrimage to Mecca was just at the beginning of becoming our pilgrimage too. His centenary shows us that Malcolm X was a man for all seasons. Thank you.
So I'm going to give away a present now. Yeah. You've all been waiting for this. It's a copy of my book. I realise that the best way to get rid of your books is to get them away.
That's it.
Rather than try and sell them. It's got iron blank, so you don't have to be. In fact, it kind of resonates with Malcolm X. I'm going to quote from someone, and I want you to tell me who's the author of this quote.
Oh.
You guys don't answer.
Oh,
Oh, we can't answer.
No, well, you can't, but silently. You're not going to get the book.
all right.
I was in some way in those years, without entirely realizing it, the great black hope of the great white father. I was not a racist, so I thought. Malcolm was a racist, so he thought.
You know who that was.
In fact, we were simply trapped in the same situation. Who wrote that?
Baldwin.
You didn't hear that. Anybody? Baldwin. Who said Baldwin? Okay.
I didn't get nothing. I'm sorry.
So Gary, when we had a pre-chat, Gary and I, on the phone a few days, and one of the key words you wanted to posit into this discussion was Malcolm X's defiance.
Yeah.
Explain that. And can you explain why white people in America feared and loathed and despised Malcolm X?
Well, yeah, and I guess to do that, I want to circle around to make sure it's clear that when I said at the beginning, like, white people like Martin Luther King seemed to like Martin Luther King too much, that was only because he was dead. Like, they didn't like him when he was alive.
Exactly, he was dead.
And that kind of, and that juxtaposition of the two has always been utterly, it's not been entirely false because they had different strategies and they coexisted. But, and it's relevant because with more work, I could see that also King was defiant. But there was something about, excuse my French, Malcolm's just like, fuck you. You have nothing that I want. You have nothing that I want and I will be fine. I'd rather be poor than eat the crap that you are shoveling me. And that in my, there was no way I could do that in my personal life, but certainly not at the time, but it was an MO that I aspired to. That the amount of triangulation, the like, oh, I think this is just a misunderstanding, the number of kind of micro and macro aggressions that I had to deal with, that knowing that there was a defiance out there, that there was a way of being that just said, I'm not, was a kind of route map to some form of sanity. Because if you keep this stuff in your head, you'll go mad. I mean, really. And so it was incredibly important to me as a kind of as a notion of what was possible, and that some people you had to give up. That you weren't. It's like, look, you know, I'm not going to have this conversation with you because you don't know anything, and it's not interesting for me, and I'd rather just walk away. That you don't have to make it right. And there was something also, and I can't remember who described him this way, but that he was always wearing his funeral suit. that every day that he woke up, but he knew what the price was likely to be, and he was prepared to pay that price. And so him, Muhammad Ali, there was a bunch of them that were just like, well, you do what you got to do, and I'm going to do what I've got to do. And, if you don't start none, you won't get none. I'm not being aggressive towards you, but I will not have you talk about me like that, talk to me like that, spread those falsehoods. It's just not going to happen. And that was, it's a powerful message, particularly if you're an aspirant, as I was, aspirant working class kid, navigating your way through British racism, to trying to find a point of comfort, but that had to deal with all of this stuff.
So, Vanessa, where do you think, were you discomforted, Vanessa, by the antipathy that Malcolm X appeared in at some stage of his life to show towards Martin Luther King, who he thought was an Uncle Tom?
I think it's interesting. You've made pains to distinguish how they were pitted against each other, and yes, had misgivings about each other in the early stages of their lives. But I'm more interested in how they came to find a begrudging respect for each other later toward their lives. And I think the thing that is always undersold, underappreciated about Malcolm X is his ability to concede and change and pivot towards the end of his life. And we never got to see what that Malcolm X would be, what he would be espousing, especially as he cut ties with Elijah Muhammad. And what I appreciate about thinking about Martin Luther King and Malcolm X at that latter end of their lives is how they were both, in a way, sort of not coming to the middle, because that implies a sort of fence-sitting or ambiguity that I don't think either of them had at any point in their lives. But you started to hear Martin Luther King saying things like, the white liberal has written this check and hasn't cashed it. These are the speeches that don't go viral. It's always I have a dream and all them things there. But he was holding the white liberals to task, and he was starting to display this impatience and this sense of urgency, and not being as willing to capitulate and come to the table, and starting to have more of that forthrightness that we usually associate with Malcolm X. And similarly, Malcolm was having his own moment of reckoning with a particular rhetoric he'd been spouting. Again, I think sort of under the thumb of a very seductive ideology through the Nation of Islam, which is a whole other... When you actually look into their beliefs and the particular doctrine that they subscribe to, there's some things there that I think are troubling. But, he was definitely under the thumb of Elijah Muhammad as a leader, was enthralled to him. He believed he owed his life and, his education and his emergence from a particular life of poverty and lack of education to Elijah. So you can really feel that. To me, Elijah Muhammad was like a cult leader in many ways. And so when he started to loose himself from that and he traveled around the world and he started to meet Muslims from different countries and he met white Muslims, I'm really moved by how he was willing to take that on. It's quite something to have been on TV and said all this stuff with your chest about, the white devil and, this rigidity of what blackness and whiteness meant to him at that point. And then obviously him having to adjust to this notion of what race and coalition and solidarity means in the wider context of the world and all these other countries he visited. I'm really inspired by what it looks like to say, I've actually changed my mind. My core beliefs haven't shifted, but how they actually pertain to the world that I've been exposed to has made me see that there are some grey areas, some nuances, some details that I was not privy to when I was younger. I think that takes huge humility, and that's true intelligence, to take on new information and adjust your beliefs and approaches accordingly. And we never got to see what that version of Martin and that version of Malcolm would have got on to do, which is, one of the biggest shames of that era.
Thanks.
Can I just add briefly, and I'm saying it to myself, I must resist making Black people a monolith. It's really important. Martin Luther King and Malcolm X were on opposite ends of the social spectrum. They were going to clash. Martin Luther King came from a very genteel Southern Baptist family. Martin Luther King studied Gandhi. Martin Luther King's father changed his name to Martin Luther in thinking about Martin Luther nailing his thesis to the church, if he did or not. Martin Luther King was a very elegant, quiet man. That's because he was a Southerner. He also knew the price of being who he was in the South. He came from the same part of the country as my dad, my late father. You stepped out of line at peril of your life, literally. And he was leading a movement in which he was confronting a power structure that had been in place for hundreds of years and had been incorporated in the United States for the last 70 years. It took us 100 years, 100 years, to have the Constitution of the United States apply to people of African descent. 100 years. And that man helped make that happen. Malcolm was from the hood. Malcolm was from Detroit. Malcolm was from the North. Malcolm was from the street. Malcolm was always going to be different in terms of his approach and how he did things from Dr. King. But they both understood, and I believe if they had lived long enough, as I know Baldwin understood how they worked together, that somehow they would have met and come together and worked together. I don't believe that they would not have done that because they were both deeply intellectual men, and they were deep searchers, and they never stayed in one place. And that is the beauty for me of both of them.
One thing that I only recently realized, and I previously thought otherwise, I always imagined that Malcolm was from a younger generation to Martin. And then realized that actually they were born like within about 4 or 5 years of each other, and that they were the same generation. And that in a range of ways, I think, what King does creates the space for Malcolm. First of all, Malcolm was mostly about his organization and spreading the word. He didn't, and I'd be happy to be corrected here, he didn't do that much in a way that King did in terms of going to Selma and so on. And
He was more involved in building the movement, wasn't he?
in building the movement and then leaving the movement and so on. And that it was the revolution in the South, which is effectively what it became, a revolution with a negotiated settlement, that then enables a shift away from the civil to the economic, away from the south to the north, from the country to the city. And this is where and this is happening while they're alive and actually after he dies, which enables the real relevance of his kind of operational defiance in the years that follow. And if you look at the civil rights movement, you see, particularly in '63, the degree to which the grassroots are always breaking away from the leadership. That at the beginning of '63, they didn't want to march on Washington. But after Birmingham, they couldn't stop one. And so they run to get ahead of it. And so in classical Marxist terms, if you think of the base and the superstructure, Malcolm was always part of the base, always representing the base in some way or shape or form. and King represented the superstructure. But there is a relationship between those two things, even if they didn't get to cement a human relationship. That relationship still exists. It's a political one.
Thank you. Vanessa, can you tell us about what you've done to imagine the return of Malcolm X?
Okay, so when I got this commission, I was determined to make this a creative response to the question of how Malcolm has influenced my thinking. And I used to work in cafes when I was young. So I was like, what would it be like to bump into Malcolm X at a cafe? So I invented this notion of the Martyrs Cafe, where all the people that died for their beliefs go and hang out. It's a purgatory of sorts, but then that implies that, they're still waiting for the judgment of some god or other. I don't really love that notion, but there's a sense of its in-betweenness and its liminality that I quite enjoy. It's not hipster. Sorry, I just want to paint a picture for you. It's not a very hipster cafe. It's more kind of, your old school, like greasy spoon kind of energy. Think of it more like that. And I'm working behind the counter. I'm a barista. There's one other staff member, Tina. It tends to be pretty slow. There's not a lot of martyrs. I Googled, martyrs. There's not loads of them. The definition of that is quite woolly as to, how we would define a martyr. But anyway, I'll read you an extract from this. So this is Malcolm at the Martyrs Cafe. When you walked in, the 3 lattes I was carrying on a plastic tray clashed to the... Oh, let me start again. When you walked in, the 3 lattes I was carrying on a plastic tray crashed to the floor. My colleague Tina looked over, then away. She is used to this sort of thing. Your lips twitched a smile of commiseration. A blade of light hit the left lens on your famous glasses, slicing the room in half. I drummed my fingers on the counter as you scanned the menu and made your order. I watched you pour 1 sugar, then another and another into your double espresso. With a grimace, you threw it down your throat like a pill. Here you are in the Martyrs Cafe, where slain heroes come to cloud watch and drink coffee, to ponder the revolutions they never lived to see. I don't work here for the money. The pay is terrible, the people watching, priceless. I shouldn't be surprised to see you here. Your supposed nemesis Martin was here a week ago, gleefully pulling on an iced mocha with caramel syrup through a straw. I have served 4 piping hot Americanos to the Joan of Arc, Joan of Arc, been amused by St. Bartholomew's unbiding affinity for chocolate brownies. But you are the first martyr to fluster me, dash my coffees and my cool to the floor. Behind the counter, Tina nudges me. She mutters at my shoulder, say something to him. I wipe furiously at the spotless patisserie shelves, biding time. What do I possibly say to you? There is a community centre in my city named after you, an entire wall taken up by a crude portrait of your face as you walk through the doors. I've seen you flash across montages depicting the onward march of Black liberation. You are always at some podium, the camera subordinate under you, or you are sat with your chin propped between thumb and forefinger, a persistent furrow in your brow. You became shorthand for the power of Black pride, of not waiting but seizing freedom. Of not waiting for but seizing freedom. How thrilling and fearful I found it. How impossible an ember of rage to live up to. It was a distinctly American and male anger. I admired it but could not claim it entirely as my own. It happened often that your history across the pond was fed to us as if it were ours. I was 9 when I first heard your name, 29 when I heard of Olive Morris. Her face anoints no posters. Her name never checked in Beyonce songs. Now I find myself resenting you, taking up so much space in that chair. You and Martin were not the only ones, certainly not the only ones that mattered, magnetic men though you were. If it were Betty and Loretta's mouths that spoke the same rhetoric, would they have captured the media the same way? This is why you're not supposed to get up close to those you admire. Our heroes are best kept as ideas, hooks on which we hang our own needs. Of course, you know this, you who watched the falling of your own hero, Elijah Muhammad. His name used to puncture your sentences like commas. There is something cultish about how we remember you. how we remember all the most photogenic leaders of the Black liberation movement. A slogan here, a raised fist there, quotes clipped free from context and nuance. It's a convenient forgetting that so many commit, to remember you only as the angry Black supremacist demagogue, to recall you as you were, a man who was once a scared boy outside the burning effigy of his family home, whose hero and once rigid beliefs betrayed him, would mean we would also have to confront our own capacities for change.
Thanks, Vanessa. I was delighted when that worked its way into my inbox. So we're going to get Gary to read in a second, because Gary wrote an introduction to the autobiography of Malcolm X in 2007. But before that, I'm just going to read a little quote which I want Bonnie to respond to.
Okay.
This is on the back cover of the original book, the autobiography of Malcolm X. When I am dead, this is Malcolm X, when I am dead, I say because from the things I know, I do not expect to live long enough to read this book in its finished form. I want you to watch and see if I'm not right in what I say, that the white man in his press is going to identify me with hate. Did that happen, Bonnie?
Well, and then it didn't happen. See, because we're talking about an arc of 50 years. I mean, when you're able to get finance to make a movie about somebody, it's passed on some level.
So you're talking about the Spike Lee movie?
Yeah, it's passed on some level. And so when you talk about the white man, that's a big generic term, okay, in many ways. Malcolm, it's so interesting also to hear what you say, both of you. Malcolm was moving into another space. He's moving away from a lot of the sort of definitions that he himself had created. He was moving from those, and he was moving quite quickly. So it's very, very difficult to talk to, now that I can say, a relatively young man who was evolving so quickly and doing it in public. It was an incredibly brave thing to do. He showed everything in public, the parts that were beautiful, the parts that were not. So it's very difficult to say how he would land, but as I said, and I wasn't joking, my generation canceled Martin Luther King. My generation canceled James Baldwin. If Malcolm had lived long enough, we would have done the same thing to him. But, and so therefore, an early death escaped him from it.
Thank you. So, Gary, would you mind reading an extract from the introduction to the autobiography of Malcolm X? I think Farley is going to accompany your reading.
This is Alex Haley's.
Yeah, Alex Haley.
Goes with- yeah.
So just a little bit of information for you if you don't know this already. Malcolm X, born in 1924, gets together with Alex Haley, who's been commissioned...
25.
25?
Because he's a
25, of course,
centenary,
yeah,
yes,
of course.
right.
Idiot. Not you.
No, Colin.
I've moved back a year. And in 1963, he gets the commission to do an interview with Malcolm X from Playboy magazine, and that leads to the book. So he's been in discussion with Malcolm X for quite some time, Alex Haley. And Gary wrote an introduction. And so why did you accept the gig first to write the introduction? And then let's have the little extract from it, please.
First of all, it was a paying gig.
Thank you.
So,
Thank you. Thank you.
know, I'm not proud.
Thank you.
And to be honest, if anything, I might have turned it down because it would have seemed too onerous. Like, how do you do that? But I felt that for me there was a clear way through to something that I could say. There wouldn't be like some major contribution, but it was...
It's pretty good.
It was big, and so I worried about it. And
Let's see what you came up with.
okay, well, this is going to be a mashup, as they say, from different bits in it. But it starts at the beginning. I have a cold, so if I stop and blow my nose, just be British and pretend nothing happened. The most dangerous creation of any society is the man who has nothing to lose, wrote James Baldwin in The Fire Next Time. You do not need 10 such men, only one will do. Malcolm X was one such man. From his birth in Omaha, Nebraska, to his assassination in the Audubon Ballroom in Harlem 39 years later, he was every bit the creation of American society. And whether he was living a life of drug-addled hedonism as a youth in Harlem, or preaching black nationalism on television as an abstemious member of the Nation of Islam, American society would always find him dangerous. Malcolm X reached me as a 20-year-old student activist in Edinburgh. And what struck me most about it then, the autobiography, was his fearlessness, both in his desire to speak truth to the powers that be, and his ability to revise and review his positions so publicly and with such integrity. The specific plot twists, from nationalism to Pan-Africanism, interested me far less at the time than the overall impression of a young black man who had long given up worrying about what people thought and had decided to speak his mind. It's a mindset that can provide inspiration to the Roma in Slovakia, the Boer in the outskirts of Paris and Marseille, the poor in the favelas of Brazil, the workers in the slums of Mumbai, the inhabitants of the townships of South Africa, or the shanty towns of Jamaica and the housing estates of Britain. In the US, where on current trends, 1 in 3 male black children born in 2001 is destined for prison, much of it needs no translation. Indeed, in a period when globalization and war have left so many with so little to lose, Malcolm X's autobiography is an important reminder that there is nothing inevitable about either the societal forces that create alienation or their political responses to it. Malcolm X regarded his Muslim identity as the starting point to engage with the wider world. Today, all too many regard it as an endpoint to cut themselves off from it. Malcolm X employed his anger in the service of political resistance. Today, anger consumes many and abandons them to a life of violent futility. What Malcolm X elaborated on and projected both in the book and in his life was not so much a political strategy, but a state of mind. His contribution to liberation theology combined the intellectual with the attitudinal. Malcolm X presented a position underpinned by both independence and defiance, a notion that freedom is not a gift awarded by others, but a right seized by those eager enough to seek it and brave enough to fight for it. That the aim of the powerless is not to prove themselves worthy to the powerful, but to demand what is rightfully theirs and to make it known that they will stop at nothing to get it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, if you want to read the full introduction, that edition is on sale outside. So, Vanessa, here we are. There's some strange things going on in America at the moment. What do you think Malcolm X would make of what was going on in America presently?
You're going to have to ask somebody else on the panel this, because I honestly, the last few days, people have been saying to me, oh my God, can you believe what Trump said next? And I'm like, I don't know. I have not been keeping abreast. Like, sort of and I know this is a terrible thing to stick your head in the sand about current affairs. It doesn't mean that the things are not happening. But, I can obviously speak to the larger disarray and the decisive crumbling of a particular world order. We've been talking about this in the green room, right? And what Malcolm X might have made of it. Although we've spoken about the perils of ventriloquizing the dead, right? So I don't know. I'm sorry, Malcolm, if I've not hit the nail on the head here. He talked about Armageddon. This is in his early, ardent Nation of Islam days when he was, a fully paid up acolyte of that belief. He would talk about Armageddon and, the coming of reckoning. And, maybe he would have pointed to this moment and he would have said, here we go. This is it, right? And it does feel like certain sort of power structures and assumed hierarchies of society are falling apart, but then still the victors of that are still going to be the same old suspects, you know, the privileged white men. So I'm sure he would have seethed at that. I think what's really frustrating about current iterations of movements towards, you know, the further liberation, emancipation of Black people and the diaspora in general, is that you look at the history, and the history has been sort of diluted into a series of images and quotes, and we really forget about the materialist, you know, social fabric of what men like Malcolm X and then later on the Black Panthers were talking about, you know, the socialist underpinnings of their beliefs, even though Malcolm X himself didn't really subscribe to communism. I think actually believed it to be a similar scourge to fascism. But certainly the Black Panthers were inspired by Malcolm X to then also feed in this notion of communist principles, and, you know, we're feeding breakfast to, you know, inner city Black kids, and we're really thinking about the material changes they wanted within their communities, as well as carrying on that notion of a separatist Black life. And Malcolm X, similarly, although you said that, you know, there was a critique leveled at him that he was sort of more about the rhetoric and the interiority of how black people perceive themselves more so than creating policy change, like some of the more integrationist Black people of the time were, there was still a real sense of what he was trying to do for his people. He was on the ground. He always lived amongst his people, you know, for the entirety of his life. He took on a vow of poverty when he became a Muslim. So he really knew and understood the material conditions of the Black people that he spoke for, and they considered him one of his own. And I think now, you know, we're in an era where people can talk about, you know, Beyonce's Super Bowl performance as somehow adjacent to Black liberation. She's got, you know, a Black beret on, and she's doing this, you know, and she's quoting Malcolm X in her songs. You know, even the Kendrick Lamar Super Bowl performance more recently, and again, just the sort of the crunching down of Black liberation to what we say, how we dress, how we carry ourselves, and not what's going on materially for Black people. You know, that's the unsexy work, right? That's the laborious, you know, every day showing up for people and finding out what needs to be done and doing it work that people don't really want to do. So I feel like Malcolm X would probably look at this this dominance of the aesthetic over the material and probably be quite disappointed in that. Though, as you say, Bonnie, his image and the fact that he was the charismatic, attractive man he was perhaps the beginning of this aestheticizing of the revolution, right? And aesthetics matter, I do believe that. You know, the visual of Black power and Black is beautiful was as much a part of it as anything. But in a world where everything is, you know, primed for being a commodity, it makes sense that political movements are defanged by focusing on the words and the images more so than, you know, the actions.
Thanks. So Gary and Bonnie, what do you think about what he might have to say about the present moment and what would be beneficial with his intervention?
I guess, I'll speak for myself. What I'm really saying when I say what I think he'd say is what I wish someone would say, right? Because either someone's saying it, in which case you could just, you know, and they're really, it feels like there are probably lots of people saying kind of things that I would like, but I'm not hearing them. They've not reached me. And so what I would hope he would say is, you see, these people were never for you. These people, they introduced the DEI stuff after George Floyd to get you off their back, and you were happy. And now they've taken it away. They don't believe in any of that. They never thought that you were equal. And while he was never a communist, he was moving towards socialism. In his later life, and that we are going to have to rely on ourselves, and we're going to have to build coalitions with other people who are getting hammered by these people, and you see what they've done. Because he also, one of the things that really warmed him to me was that he was an internationalist in a way that King was much less so. That he talked about the Mau Mau and the Organization of African Unity and so on, African American Unity. And Palestine. And you know, when Castro came to Harlem in 1960 to the Theresa Hotel, Malcolm X was his first guest. And that I think he, I want someone to say, and he would be a good candidate. Look at them, Elon Musk, Donald Trump, Giorgia Meloni in Italy. They understand the diasporic connections. The white diaspora is really going for it, right? You got Donald Trump speaking up for the Afrikaners. You got Elon Musk, a white South African, in his office talking about democracy like he knows anything about democracy. So now would be a time for us to rethink the degree to which we might act as a diaspora. We are being attacked diasporically across the world. If it's aid or Palestine or whatever it is, and we have to respond in kind, and we will respond with whoever agrees with us, which was where he was at the end. I don't know that he'd say that, but I wish someone would say that. And it would suit the politics he had at the moment. Bearing in mind when he died, bearing in mind that he was always evolving, we don't know where he's going to end up, right? Which is a bit worrying. But yes, I think that.
Thank you, Gary. Bonnie, firstly, what was the mood like after his assassination in 1965? And what relevance does he have today to the political climate discussions going on in America and around the world, would you say?
Well, let me just say, first of all, and I thank particularly Vanessa for reminding me, I knew Fred Hampton. And Fred Hampton, I worked in his breakfast program for children, and on the west side of Chicago. Sorry. Sorry.
We'll let you compose yourself.
It takes a long time to realize how young they were. Malcolm was young. Fred was young. Martin Luther King was young. And to outlive them is a kind of curse, in a way, because you have to go on. I think that their assassinations, and they were assassinated, cut short a kind of investigation that the three of them were making into the conundrum that is the United States. You see, I have to remember something, and I'm writing about this. I hope Gabriel and I can do this again. Sorry about the tears. Fred always makes me cry. America is an idea. It's a set of principles. That's all it is. And if you don't agree with the idea, it's fucked. Okay, there is nothing that holds it. You can talk about the Constitution. The Constitution of the United States has loopholes in it. And Mr. Trump is driving a coach and horses through them all. And I think what Fred and what Malcolm and what Martin tried to say is this is fragile, everybody. This is fragile. You think that this is strong, that there's some backing. No country in the world has ever existed like the United States of America because it is a set of ideas. That's it. And if you don't agree with the ideas or if you undermine the ideas, it's done. And Malcolm, in his way, always said that. This is an idea. I'm going to give you another idea now. about what this country is about. Martin said the same thing, and so did Fred. So, in a sense, I completely lost track as I started crying. In a sense, I don't want to eulogize them or put them in aspect or put them on pedestals because they were the opposite of that. All three of them, the opposite of that. Totally. I think Malcolm would be appalled now to see how he's deified. He was totally against all of that. Totally against all of that. And toward the end of his life, he demonstrated it time and time again. He was pushed and moved to speak because he saw the contradictions in the idea of the United States of America, and he had to testify. He was testifying the whole time, which is why he moved away from the nation, and why when he went on his pilgrimage, when he went on the Hajj, he saw something else, and he came back to tell us there was something else, and he didn't have enough time to tell us. And there were a lot of elements in the United States of America, ranging from black to white, who were invested in making sure he didn't tell us. So we don't need to put him in some kind of... A whole lot of people didn't want Malcolm to grow and continue. A whole lot of people. So we need to, I feel, and for me, is to honor his continuing exploration of his country, of his personage, of people of African descent, people who are Muslims. The whole 9 yards is what he was about. He was not allowed to be a full human being, and we must allow him to be a full human being. That's the least that we owe this great man, is his humanity. And that's how I feel about it.
We're going to round this up with just a final question to you all.
Sorry.
So here's another quote for you. I've done my research.
You have to keep quiet for this one.
He was... There's no prize. There's no prize. He was charming and gracious. He was a passionate orator who could whip a crowd to euphoria. That was... who said that? That was Eve Arnold, who took some of the lovely photographs of Malcolm X. She was on the road with him in the 60s. But he was a great speaker, wasn't he? And when I think about Malcolm X now, and I read the book, I've read the book recently, he's actually quite funny as well, isn't he?
Very funny, he's very funny.
He could speak to people in a way that they understood.
He was very
He didn't use
funny.
highfalutin words. He drilled down and he spoke to people's dreams and imaginations, didn't he? Can we riff on that, about the positive way that you can embrace him into your soul?
Can I say, when I was growing up and watching him come on that talk show, what's the talk show on BBC One? Because I don't watch television. Which one's it? No, the other one. He has all the stars and stuff on.
Graham Norton.
Yeah, Graham Norton. He came on the equivalent of Graham Norton. And Malcolm would come on, and all these people were ready to fight him. Malcolm would come on in a Bonwood Teller suit, okay, because for me, we saw people, the civil rights generation, people wearing overalls, working class people working. Malcolm would come on clean, have his tie, had a sheaf of papers. These folks would start attacking him. Malcolm would go, right here, Article 5, Section 6 of the United States Constitution. And you're a little kid, you sitting back there going, yes, this kind of thing. Yeah. So he was a man of the theater. He understood performance. He understood presentation. He understood that, what we need to do is to change the visuals and all of that, and then people will change. I think we went a little bit too far, but that's what he did, I think.
Thank you.
Yeah, he was righteous, absolutely, and would make these, bracing statements that, as we know at the time, really made America clutch her pearls. Not just white people, but, a lot of the middle class, black people that were aspiring to assimilation, etc. There were plenty of black people that also found him unnerving. So, he would say lots of, staunch, bracing things about his stance on black liberation. But he also had this dexterity, this playfulness, as you say, like this humor. He would break into that grin constantly. Usually when he thought that the interviewers that he was in conversation with were chatting shit. You could kind of just see, these people are not my intellectual equals. But also you could see that he was really willing to have conversations. He wasn't just there to stand on his soapbox and, you know, say what he had to say and go. He really wanted to be in conversation with people. And I think it's a finesse that a lot of current, you know, pundits, you know, people supposedly speaking for the black community do not have. You know, your Dr. Umar Johnson's, I dread to say his name, but, you know, the people that are now sort of holding the mantle for a particular type of, you know, black pride, you know, the Hoteps, you know, the Hotep committee. And, you know, it's like all of the rhetoric with none of the intellect, none of the humility, none of the actual ability to converse and to exchange in ideas and to be well read, and to actually, again, like I said before, understand the materialist notions of what black liberation would be. And so it was such a joy to look back on his interviews and say, oh, this was a man that actually cared about the exchange of ideas, you know? Just because what he said was strident doesn't mean that he was bullish, doesn't mean that he wasn't interested in, you know, a bit of banter, a bit of back and forth, you know? He was a conversationalist, and you can kind of see that in how Alex Haley talks about him in the introduction to the autobiography. He talks about these conversations that he had with Malcolm over many months and how he managed to break through a long time of, you know, mutual suspicion between the two of them and find someone who was silly and, you know, would often go into these moments of contrition about not being able to spend time with his family, or, you know, like joking about his young life, you know, dancing in the jazz clubs or whatever. Just, as you said, Bonnie, like a dude. A guy.
Total dude.
Yeah, like a guy. And how he would go out in the streets and talk to people. He would talk to the drug dealers. He would talk to the pushers and, you know, the people who just sat on their stoops, you know, whiling away the time. And they all felt completely at ease with him. He wasn't some deity from the telly that you couldn't dare approach. And so, you know, we need a bit of that back. That would be lovely in our current leaders, speakers. And maybe they are there, and as you say, we're just not hearing them. They're being drowned out of the algorithm, in favour of the dum-dums, the Dr. Umar Johnsons et al. So let's you know, let's put our money in and our attention towards the people that we actually feel have something of substance to say.
So, final word from Gary.
Well, I think he was a quintessential organic intellectual, right? I think no formal book learning. He comes from a group of people who, frankly, we're not supposed to hear from. People talk about the voiceless. It's not that they've got no voice, it's just that the voice isn't amplified. And so, and that gave him a capacity to, particularly in his speeches, to speak in a vernacular, to be one of the audience and talk to the audience at the same time. Usually the people who are talking to the audience aren't of the audience. And he was. And so, that, you know, some very powerful imagery, even if, you know, the stuff that he says towards his early life and the white devils and all that kind of stuff I don't believe and agree with, although I can see how he gets there, and it doesn't scare the bejesus out of me. I just think that's not for me. But that, you know, when he talks about the house Negro and the field Negro, and the field Negro, the house Negro saying, you know, our house is burning down, and the field Negro's like, well, it's not my house. I mean, that is an incredibly powerful image that he's building. Or you stick a knife in my back and then you put it out 3 inches. You haven't cured me. How about you don't stab me in the first place? And you have to put it. Or, you know, we need some Mau Mau in here. You know, there's a period where he's evoking the Mau Mau as almost as a strategy. And so in his, I mean, if King was a classical poet, then Malcolm is more like spoken word, I guess. But that there is poetry in his...
Totally.
In his talking, in his thinking. Totally. And it's a poetry that is rooted in the working class black experience, which not entirely until that point. And if we take the rural experience, there are other ways in which it comes out through church, but that is seen and evoked as a kind of moral panic, but is rarely heard from. And so that also gives it a kind of very idiosyncratic value and texture.
Thank you. So I think we've heard a lot of intelligence and poetry here tonight. We're going to cede the floor to Fale now, but before we do that, I want to ask you to join me in thanking Bonnie, Gary, and Vanessa. I'm going to go around the section. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. You're going to get a chance to thank them again after Fale's played, by the way, so keep your powder dry. So, Fale, you're going to play 4 songs for us?
Okay.
Okay, I'm going to leave the stage now and see that Fale. Hold on. You're not applauding my leaving the stage, are you?
Thanks, everyone, being patient to be here. I'm going to do just little songs. Most of my songs I talk about peace. Here, about war, harmony. So, and then I sing in different languages. I'm not that good in English. I just speak English, but I can sing in English. So tonight, I'm just going to sing some few songs. In Mandinka, in Fulani, in Susu, in Konyagi, and anything God give me to say. Mabaruka minfo manenke baluka ninfo kebaluka ninfo yeah manenke baluka fo kanye benkelema John te tolando John cité to I go to Wanata do Hatten Warren come you come I do not know I do not go need I go to Wanata do Wadu Sara Wawi Como Jiko Wadu Sara Wawi Como Jiko Yamario, Yamario, Anube Maninka Lady, Maninka, Maninka, Anube Maninka Lady. Thank you. This instrument is just called gongoma, but it's made with a calabash. Some people call it gourd. So simple with soul blade. Ofatu baraisa, ofatu baraisa, ofatu baraisa baraisa, fatia bulawa baraisa, ofatu baraisa, ofatu baraisa, ofatu baraisa baraisa, fatia bulawa baraisa. Azumala, azumala, yo, azumala, 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 yo, azumala, azumala, yo, azumala, 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 yo, azumala, ndangehine na meni. Jamu fatutu yara makolo sana mindento. Nsigamene Sierra Leone, nsigamene Senegal, nsigayo la Guinée, ndamu fatuto. Asana mineya, deme sana mine wamatana tuto fenyara. Ofatu baraisa, ofatu baraisa. Ofatu baraisa baraisa, fatu yabulawa baraisa, ofatu baraisa, oteme baraisa go, ofatu baraisa baraisa, fatu yabulawa baraisa, nene mawira, o mi jambata mo. Oh Thank you. I am Veleka. Parafina I am Veleka. Sanjeliete. Atelejelie biri. Asujeliete. Neman korokaye, neman faye, neman teruye, funyewa, mandin kono, funyewale, mandin kono, ay tunyaba, lamini hejun kora foyina, ay tunyale. Neri waka na moluye Ikasanyelike Amerika Hanisemiko sigi fire Inaya Ulale janjaria Unko wulare janjani Warite mola nyawa Nabara Ferati nyenyo kosegi Mfabara Iye farafina I am Velela Africa ene velela, oh velela oh, kunyo wa fabara, kunyo wa nuru. Thank you. Ayo, yo. I'm a for in your neck. I'm a for your neck. Kill a money. I can't for you. Kill a money. Nakerayando, Mosi Titulayan. Deni Benafaga, Moba Benafaga. Ino, Bomelo no San Kele, Kele Nalaga, Ole Tina. Amani, Kele Mani, Yanibe. Mani, Kele Mani Feu. Tout le monde aspire au bonheur. Pourquoi tant de gens sont-ils malheureux? Qu'est-ce qui ne va pas à ceux qui vivent au-dessus de la loi? Ayafonye, ane bene koyano. Halame, yo halame, halame, mene me falaka gere. Halame, yo halame yo, mene me falaka gere do. Bangina rantiri nyekeme. Kire famana na kana ube. Bangina anti nyekeme. Kire famana na kana re yo. Wolane, 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 wolane. Ayebeya, ayebeya, oh, lamedo. Thank you.
So you can check out Farley on Spotify or Apple Tunes, on all those platforms. I think you will agree with me, he's a fantastic performer and really speaks to the spirit of tonight. Thank you very much, Farley.
Thank you very much.
It's lovely to see the photograph of Malcolm X there, because that's how I imagine him, actually, with a big welcoming smile, embracing smile. And that's how his people saw him. And increasingly, that's how people do see him. And I think we saw him tonight through the words and the powerful descriptions and emotions of Gary Younge, Bonnie Greer, and Vanessa Kisuule. So thanks for coming out. Thanks to the British Library and to the Eccles Institute for the Americas. Thanks also to the Royal Literary Fund, who were a great, I think, force for what is great about English and British literature today, and we're part of that conversation. We're going to be back here on the 3rd of July to have another discussion around Frantz Fanon. So put that in your diaries, and let's go and raise a glass to Malcolm X. Thank you.